Excellent. Welcome everyone to Brain Northwest's programming. Today we have a class called Reentry. It's about returning to work and community at your own pace with Catina Turner. Caterina has a master's in education and a rich experience as a case manager working largely with people in the veteran community and people with brain injury, and is hailing from South Carolina. Am I north? South? I got it? Okay.
South Carolina. You got
Okay, Carolina, there we go. Um, and but I'm really thankful that she is here. Her rich professional experience and her personal experience brings um, a wonderful sense of presence and guidance and permission for the challenges of being human and living in the world that we live in. So thank you, Katerina, as always, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining and sharing your time today. I will be monitoring and taking care of things. So um, thank you, and feel free to get started, Katerina.
Thank you, Reggie. I'm Katarina, and today we're going to be talking about reentry. The meaning of reentry may absolutely look different for each of you. You may immediately think about either returning to a job, and while returning to work is absolutely a part of the conversation, it's not the only part. So, the question underneath reentry can involve confidence, privacy, money, transportation, family, responsibilities, symptoms. I can go on, and I'm sure you can certainly add to the list. But a person may want to move forward and still have concerns about what moving forward looks like and then what that requires. By the end of our time together, I hope you leave with a few takeaways. Reentry is often treated like one very large decision. Am I ready to go back or not? What does that even mean? But that question can carry so much weight that it becomes difficult to answer. There are usually several smaller questions underneath it. One of those questions is what reentry means for you now. It may involve returning to paid work, but it may also mean something different, whether that's volunteering, taking a class, mentoring, or becoming involved in your community. The goal is not to fit everyone into the same definition of progress, and by no means will this class involve anything of the sort. Rather than to think about what feels meaningful to you and what fits your life as it is right now. We're also going to look at barriers differently. When something is hard, and I'm absolutely guilty of it, it's easy for the thought to become, I can't do this anymore. But difficulty doesn't always tell us what's wrong. Sometimes it tells us that one part of the task, or the environment, or even the timing, or even the way that information is being presented is creating the problem. So, not so much an us problem, but rather something else, an external factor. Once we can identify that part, we can begin thinking about what might make it more manageable. And this is where the tools come in. So, a tool doesn't have to be complicated. And I feel like there's always some back and forth about tools and if a tool adds to the problem or if it's beneficial. And a tool doesn't have to be complicated. It can be written instructions, a reminder, a plain break, or a different way of organizing the task. So the point is not to use every strategy available, even though it's very fun to collect them and try them out. It's to find the one that best suits your flow and the barrier. We're also going to talk about how to ask for help. And that can be difficult because you may feel pressure to explain everything, whether that's what happened, what's changed, or why you need something different. An useful conversation usually doesn't require your whole story. And sometimes, if you absolutely want to share your story, that's wonderful. But it requires just enough information for the other person to understand what's getting in the way and then how you can go about supporting or how they can go about supporting. Pace is another part of the picture. Completing something once is not the same as being able to build it into your life. You want it to be sustainable. So a plan may look successful during the activity, but still require so much preparation or recovery that it becomes difficulty to repeat. So we're going to look at the full demand. not only the hours or the schedule of what, say, volunteering takes, but really thinking about what leaves enough capacity for the rest of your daily life and functioning. And throughout all of this, we're going to keep coming back to support. So reentry doesn't have to be worked out by one person alone. There's going to be a lot of different questions. You may need different kinds of input, but you remain the person making the decisions. The purpose of support is to help you understand your options and then to carry out the plan and not to take ownership from you. So before we get into strategies, accommodations, or schedules, I want to ask you something a little more personal. What part of life have you been missing? And you can absolutely sit with this or feel free to throw it in the chat. But just ask yourself, what do I feel when I'm attending this class? The reason for me attending. Am I considering reentry? Have I already begun to re-engage with the community? Is this something I plan to do way in the future, but I just kind of want to hear about it? So maybe it's using your skills or feeling of use or getting into a new routine or having somewhere to be. It could be absolutely earning income or just being around other people and having something in the week that belongs to you. Some people say that they want to go back to work, but when we talk a little longer, what they're really missing is part of something. They miss being needed, they miss being able to contribute, or having a reason to get ready in the morning, or just having that schedule and something to look forward to. And they miss recognizing themselves in the life that they're living or that they used to live. And then reentry isn't about creating more room in your life for purpose and connection and contribution and choice. The path's going to look different for everyone. So it might lead you back to the familiar job that maybe you had prior entry, starting something new, or even just getting back into the community and taking a yoga class. So the right starting point is the one that moves you towards something that you care about and it is unique to you. There is no right way to rejoin the community or become involved again. So you don't have to know exactly where this is going yet. But as you look at the choices on this slide, just really think about what's pulling you and what you're hoping to have more of in your life specifically, rather than a blanket, I'd like a job. Is it money? We all need money, that's for sure. But if you're considering other options too, like volunteering, then really ask yourself, what do I envision for myself? Not only can I do this, but what would make me feel fuller or more connected? So apprehension is common. And you may wonder whether you'll remember the steps or keep pace or keep pace with the conversation. That is a tongue twister. Energy can be a concern, and you may be able to complete a shift or an appointment and still wonder what it'll cost. So really just identifying these different areas that you can re-enter is specific to you, like we had mentioned. And money absolutely creates another layer. The household may need income, while the person returning may also be afraid that earnings could affect benefits or health coverage. And sometimes the hardest part is just not knowing what kind of support exists. So the purpose of naming these concerns is not really to talk you out of it, rather than to decide what kind of response is needed. A performance concern may need a tool, while, say, a privacy concern may need better information about disclosure. Sorry, I had one slide on mine, then I realized it wasn't matching or adding up. So certainty may never come. And one of the most difficult questions in reentry is, how will I know when I'm ready? And it is difficult because readiness is not one feeling, and it is not the same for every role or person. You may never reach a morning when, you feel confident of, okay, today is the day, or uncertainty is not a reason to ignore symptoms, restrictions, or medical advice. I just want to be very clear about that. So always the best practice to keep your provider in the loop. Ready enough is not a clinical determination, and the signs on the slide are not a test that gives anyone permission to override safety guidance. So if you do have restrictions related to driving, balance, seizures, vision, lifting, screen use, medication effects, you name it, or any other safety concern. Those restrictions remain in place until the appropriate provider changes them. Reentry planning works within those guardrails. And within that boundary, there are observations that can make a timing conversation more useful. One is a stretch of steadier weeks, and it doesn't mean symptom-free weeks. You know more about when your energy is strongest and which activities tend to increase symptoms, how long your recovery takes, and which routines are dependable. Another useful observation is whether responsibilities leave any capacity for something additional. So, if that job or volunteer or class includes much more than the hours listed on the schedule. And then there's getting ready for the event. So, even just working up to getting to the place, that could be enough in and of itself. So, whether that's travel or parking or noise or conversation, decision making, a big one that always came up was task switching, and then that transition going back home. So, if in an ordinary day it already uses everything available, the first step might be changing the total demand rather than adding another commitment. And it can also help to look at something you already do consistently. So, maybe say you do attend a 2 hour class, or even attending this class today is a stretch, or keeping a weekly appointment or managing a family responsibility. The activity itself is not proof that you're ready for a job, which is giving you that information of, "Whew, I can do about an hour and then I'm done for the day." So then maybe think about something smaller. Where can you go to where you're just there for about 30 minutes? Maybe the commute isn't so bad. If travel adds more strain than the activity, then maybe you want to think about something in a remote capacity, like this class, or maybe kind of like an online group, a support group. So those details make a conversation with a provider much more productive rather than just saying, "Well, am I ready for work?" I mean, that is a very broad question. And a provider may not know what the job or the commute or schedule will involve. So that way you can give them something concrete, that my travel time takes 20 minutes, there's traffic. Sometimes I forget, my keys, or I'm forgetting what I need to get out the door by the time that I get there. I've forgotten all the things, so I have to go back. So this is again just giving that information of what works best for you. And then the provider has that information and can support more of a useful conversation. They can help you consider whether those patterns may mean for safety or workload or schedule recovery, and whether a gradual increase would make sense. And they can help monitor you throughout that process. And then once you have a clear sense of direction and timing, the next question is going to be fit. People often ask, what can I still do? The difficulty is that it treats ability as if it exists separately from the environment. And every role takes place under conditions, as we mentioned earlier, whether it's a physical setting, a level of noise, or how information is delivered. A person may be capable of doing meaningful work and still need those conditions to be extremely specific to maybe pre-injury. And that's why this slide brings together 4 parts: what you're good at, or area of interest, what matters to you, and then the demands that you carry and the conditions that help. A strength and a support can exist in the same description, but you may be excellent with people and work best one person at a time rather than in a crowded reception area. You may have, say, a deep knowledge of a field and need additional time to organize and answer during a meeting. So, say for instance, I knew a gentleman who always requested that he have an agenda, so he knew how to prepare, what kind of questions were going to be asked. Maybe I can gather my thoughts or present any questions in advance. So when they're saying, "Well, any questions?" And by the time that that meeting is done, the moment has come and gone, and he had those questions, but he didn't have the time to process how to articulate those questions. So that's just an example. The prompts on the slide are a starting point for building that description. So think about maybe one strength that you bring or one condition that helps you, whether that's headphones or a quiet space, kind of mapping out, say, if you have to travel, mapping out where you have to go. My husband likes to always visit a place if he has a meeting, just so he knows where to go, what time to show up, so he's not frantic about timing. He knows what to expect. And then, what kind of demand that costs you extra. So those three pieces can help you evaluate a role, explain your needs to your provider, or prepare for a conversation about support. And fit also helps us understand a larger picture. Tools help us work with the specific problem. But when something isn't going well, it's easy to jump from the situation to conclusion about yourself. So I want you to try before accepting that conclusion. Slow the situation down enough to really see what the barrier is. And you start by naming the task. So a broad statement like, oh, mornings, I'm done. Mornings are impossible for me, may be absolutely completely true. You may be no good for anything in the morning, and that is okay. And a more specific statement would look something like, I lose track of the steps between maybe getting ready or remembering what I need to leave the house. And that gives you really somewhere to begin. So if mornings are no good, what specific part of the morning is catching you? And then you identify the barrier. Are there any steps unclear? Do I just feel like, ugh, I'm exhausted in the morning? It's just fatigue. And if that's the case, then that's okay and that's enough, and you don't need to break it down. But if there are steps, are there too many decisions that I have to make in the morning? Am I getting decision fatigue? Is my environment noisy? Or are instructions being maybe provided too quickly? And then does fatigue increase at a certain point? So once the barrier is clear, you choose the one tool that responds to it. And if the sequence is being lost, a checklist might help. Some people don't like, again, that checklist because it's just one more thing to do, one more thing to remember. So again, there are so many tools out there. It's just a matter of finding the right tool that works for you, like a new schedule, or you can use your phone and say, send me an alarm with a reminder at 8 a.m. to remember to feed the dog before I leave, or whatever that looks like for you. And then finally, review what happened. Did the tool reduce the missteps? What was simple enough to maintain? Or did it help or create an additional barrier, like we had mentioned? And the example on the slide is supposed to be pretty ordinary. Getting out the door on time, the barrier is keeping the morning steps in order. The tool is one checklist near the door. And then if mornings become calmer and the checklist is easier to use, it stays. If it doesn't help, don't blame yourself. It's not a you issue, it's a tool issue. So this process will not make every barrier disappear, but the idea is that it helps you prepare for something that you haven't built up. You haven't built up that routine. And this, using the tools, try them out. If it works, continue, build that routine up and see if it works for you. So again, kind of reiterating what I was just saying, just matching the tool to the moment. Um, For some individuals, remembering includes written steps, labeling alarms. Always label the alarms. So you're connecting the alarm going off with what needs to be done. For organizing, checklist, make it visible. For instance, rather than just saying, Katarina, complete the class registration, you would put open the registration and find the deadline. That way you're tracking when does this close? And that is a good jumping off point. Rather than overwhelming yourself with, oh, I've got to do this whole registration all at once, just thinking, okay, I need to figure out what the deadline is, and then I have this much time to do said deadline. And then for attention, a useful change may be your environment. So a quieter space, fewer interruptions, noise canceling headphones. And it may be as simple as scheduling focus work away from the busiest part of the day. So say, for me, 5 o'clock, my kiddo, today was his first day of school. He gets out of school and my house is rather noisy. So it is not a good time to complete any kind of tasks at that. And then for energy, which I know is always a stressor, take planned breaks. You can always request a unique schedule or you can place the most demanding work during the part of the day where your concentration is the strongest, and that looks different for everyone. And I absolutely believe that transportation belongs on this list, so getting there. Just because the demand begins before the activity starts, it's stressful. Driving, whether you're navigating public transportation or the parking lot or where to go or traffic, there are so many different variables to transportation. And then remote or hybrid work may be another possibility if that role supports it. So again, it's not a one size catch all. A person may use one strategy. The goal is not to gather as many accommodations as possible rather than to think about what works best for yourself and try them out. And if it fits, great. If not, just find another one. Once you identify a useful tool, and that's when you find that magic tool. Some of you may be sitting there like, oh gosh, Katarina, I've tried all the tools and it doesn't work for me. And that's completely okay. And sometimes the answer is, you know, no, no one needs to be involved when it comes to me using my tools. This is a private strategy that I use on my own. And the private strategy is something that you use without asking any organization to change anything. So think about, say, I were volunteering. I'm using a planner. I'm making talking points. No disclosure is needed at that point because the strategy is entirely within my control. Then, when you need a tool to where you need to make an informal request, you need to loop someone in rather than keeping it to yourself. You might ask something like, could you send that in writing? Or can we identify a top priority before this meeting ends? A lot of information was provided. Can I have one solid takeaway that I can take from this meeting? And people make requests like these for many reasons. The request may be granted without any medical disclosure or formal process. And then lastly, a formal accommodation request is different because you are telling an employer or a volunteer coordinator that a change at work is needed for a reason related to a medical condition. And you don't need special legal language, and you do not have to begin this by naming any sort of diagnosis. You do, however, sometimes need to make the connection clear enough for the employer to understand that there is an accommodation request. So, for example, you might say, because of a medical condition affecting my concentration, I'm requesting written task priorities after our weekly meeting. And then when the need for the accommodation is not so obvious to the employer, say, um, there's a lot of masking involved. The employer may request reasonable documentation, and that documentation should address the relevant limitation and why the accommodation is needed. And in most situations, the employer is absolutely not entitled to any of your medical records that include unrelated information. So that formal request begins the process. And sometimes there is no guarantee that they can make that accommodation. And that's why it's just helpful to explain what's difficult and what the accommodation needs to accomplish rather than focusing on one specific tool. So say for instance, I needed a stool. I was very fatigued during the day. I needed a stool to sit down. I was a cashier. I can simply say I become fatigued easily. Resting, just sitting down just helps. I do have a medical condition and I can make this formal accommodation request. And volunteer and community settings may vary too. Some organizations have a formal accessibility process, and then others can handle requests by simply just saying, hey, Reggie, I need a chair to sit down. If I can just be afforded a stool, that'd be great. Sure, Katarina, no problem. Here's the stool. That's what that would look like, or that's the intention of what it would look like. And very important as we're speaking about disclosure is you do not owe everyone your story. And disclosure can feel different because people often receive conflicting advice. The questions on this slide are designed to bring the decision back to your purpose. Begin with why you are sharing. Are you requesting an accommodation? Are you trying to solve a specific barrier? Are you asking for support from someone that you trust? Or are you preparing, say, the volunteer coordinator for something that you anticipate is going to come up? Maybe you haven't been so fatigued, but you can feel it building up a little bit. I feel like maybe if I integrate in this stool for my fatigue, then I should be fine. So if there is no clear purpose, you may not need to have that conversation yet. Then I want you to consider who actually needs the information. It may be your supervisor, human resources, an accommodation contact, your supervisor, or just a trusted person at work or a colleague who can maybe help advocate for yourself in that moment if the accommodation is minor. The next question is, how much information is useful? In many situations, you can focus on function rather than the entire history. So you can explain that you process information better when the steps are written, that a predictable schedule helps you manage your fatigue. You know, if say they're like, oh, you might be on, say, night shift or something, and that doesn't work with me or my brain or my body. So just really being clear and that you do need that predictable schedule, or that you may need a brief break after sustained screen work. Screen fatigue is real, especially for individuals with brain injuries. So advocating for yourself in that regard is always very important. And timing matters too. So sometimes the barrier can be anticipated, and sometimes it becomes clear only after the role begins. So, say you never anticipated needing someone to write things down after a meeting until you're like, wow, I was listening. I was looking at Katarina's lips, but like I wasn't able to process anything, whether that's you were staring at the screen, or maybe you had a hard time with all of the moving faces, or someone maybe not taking a break. We only have 45 minutes here, and I try to be as slow as possible when I tend to talk very fast. So not being able to take a break sometimes for people's brain is just, it's too much. So just really advocating for yourself, protecting your privacy, and asking for support can certainly all happen at the same time. You can be selective and clear and focused on the information that is relevant to the situation. And that is it. So, returning to an existing job and beginning something new involve different kinds of preparation. If you have a job to return to, you know, the duties, the schedule, the culture and people, and that information can help you anticipate where your barriers may be. Ask how the return process work and who handles accommodation requests, just to be safe. So if a gradual schedule may be needed, it's helpful to raise the question before the return to date when possible. And if you do have, say, if a particular task begins to create difficulty, addressing it earlier can absolutely create more room to consider options before the situation becomes complicated, or before you kind of just throw your hands up and say, oh, you know, this isn't for me. So really advocating for yourself early is so very important. And you can describe what's happening, you know, explain what has helped in similar situations and ask maybe what's available there at that organization or that company. And if you're joining a new position, um, you may want to, but again, you absolutely don't have to bring up any of your medical information. But before a conditional job offer, employers generally may not ask disability related questions directly. They may ask whether you can perform the functions of the job and how you would perform them. So if you need an accommodation for the application or the interview process, you may request one. And examples might include accessible location, quieter setting, accessible technology, or clear written instructions for, say, assessments. And a lot of times, I always heard about a gap in your work history, and that was always a fear of going back. And it can create a lot of anxiety. So you may choose to give a brief, truthful answer without naming a diagnosis. Again, you share only what you're comfortable with, and it could look something like I was having self-care or taking care of family, or you know, no one is going to ask you to do a deep dive. But that could look like I took time away for personal reasons, and now I'm focusing on, say, finding a role that fits my current skills and goals. So the resources on this slide offer different starting points. Idealist includes a nonprofit and volunteer roles, which I love. I love their website. They do have a lot of different volunteer opportunities on there. WorkSource provides job search and employment resources across Washington, and then Ticket to Work is a free voluntary Social Security program for eligible adults, either receiving SSDI or SSI. And if you're not sure what accommodation to support your request would look like, begin with the task rather than the diagnosis. So, what are you trying to do? What specifically gets in the way? And then what change might make that part more manageable? And again, once the barrier is clear, the request becomes easier to describe or articulate. And the three sentences on the slide try to give you a little bit of framework so you can have that conversation. So the first identifies the barrier, the second proposes a change, and the third explains what change would make possible. So you might say, I'm having difficulty keeping track of tasks given verbally at the end of our meeting. Could you use a written priority list that could help me complete the work, say, in order to meet the deadlines? For a formal accommodation request, you might need to add that medical component. Because of a medical condition affecting my memory or my executive functioning, I'm requesting written follow-up after meetings, and that would help me complete assigning tasks consistently. In a volunteer community setting, the language may be, more informal, like I had mentioned earlier. And the wording doesn't have to sound polished. It just needs to be specific enough for the other person to really understand what's difficult, what you're requesting, and how that change would help. And you may also decide to make the request in writing. And this gives you time to choose your words and gives you time to really think about what would be beneficial and what kind of tool would be advantageous for you. And it also helps to keep a record of that request. That's very important. And Jan offers sample language that can help you think through possible accommodations before you approach your employer as well. And Jan is the Job Accommodation Network. So many acronyms out there. That's right, Reggie, the Job Accommodation Network. All right. So PACE is where many well-designed plans either become sustainable or draining. So just being able to complete something once, that's great, but we want it to be sustainable. So here you'll see the boom and bust pattern. And it often begins on a good day when you're feeling really good. If you have any of those days where your energy and your concentration are stronger, even if it's just slightly. So you're like, you know what? I can absolutely do this. And that's great. The activity gets done, but it may show up later in a different cost, whether you're kind of just on the couch all day and, they really took it out of you, but you had that really great day. And then recovery may take longer. So your responsibilities may pile up, and the next attempt begins from a lower starting point. So not everyone experiences the patterns in the same way. And some people may notice fatigue easily, while others may notice, say, more headaches, slower processing, that may show up in irritability or word finding difficulty. So just really looking at the full pattern over the day at the end of the day when relevant. And then the following day gives you a better picture of whether that pace is sustainable. If you still feel like you're not pouring from an empty cup, you've got a lot of juice left to give, then you can really think, okay, well, maybe this is repeatable. This is something that I can continue to do. So the three prompts on the slide turn pacing into an early warning plan. And what is one early sign is that you're becoming overloaded. What can you do when you notice it? Who could you contact before the situation becomes harder to manage? An early sign may be rereading the same sentence. So say you're at work and you just start this new position and you're reading an email, but it's not really processing. You're kind of just rereading the same sentence over and over again, or losing track of a conversation, or even feeling visual strain. Or just, like I said, becoming irritable. So that response might be a brief break or a quieter setting or moving to a simpler task, or just, again, requesting that time to step away. But knowing these signs in advance matters because the overload can make it harder to recognize options while you're in the moment. So a pacing plan is more so of, it's not a promise that symptoms will never increase. It's more so a way to notice the pattern earlier and then respond to it intentionally. And this is for if there are any partners in this class or viewing this video in the future. You have, absolutely spent a long period coordinating appointments or managing logistics, looking for changes or improvements, or even decline, just always kind of keeping an eye on. But as your loved one begins taking on more, it may not be obvious when to step forward or when to step back, or how to respond when your observations are different from theirs. So say, you feel like, Karen, you're ready. Like I feel it. Like you're having a lot of really good days. But what they're not seeing is kind of you feeling that slump at the end of the day. So a few pressures can exist. One is the fear that reentry is happening too quickly and that the demand will be too much. And the answer is not for one person to take over the plan. It's more so to be intentional with that support. So, with your loved one's permission, it's always helpful to prepare questions before an appointment or take notes during a meeting or track patterns over several days, but not just what you're seeing from their patterns. Really sit down and have a conversation. How are you feeling today around noon? You looked really great, but were you feeling really great at that time? After volunteering, what did that look like for you? What did that feel like? Because from my observation, it looked like you were very tired. Um, is this something that you can envision you doing, maybe once a week or a couple times a week? So just having that conversation rather than making your subjective observations is always very helpful. And then before stepping in, ask kind of what kind of help is wanted. Does the person want you to handle that task at the appointment alongside them? You can say something like, would you like me to handle this? Or would you like me to sit alongside you to help you complete this registration? Do you want me to share what I've noticed? Or would you rather just lead the conversation? What would feel supportive right now is the most beneficial question. What can I do for you right now? Can I do anything? And here's our find out what's available slide. Benefits questions deserve accurate, individualized answers, which I am not ready to give you today. When it comes to SSDI, SSI, Medicare, Medicaid, they all follow different rules. And earnings may affect each program differently, whether that's cash benefits, health coverage. It may change on different timelines. So reporting requirements matter as well. This is why another person's story cannot tell you what will happen in your situation. You may hear, oh, so and so went back to work, they're doing fine, they did it. They may receive a different benefit, or they live in a different state, or use a different work incentive, or have different level of earnings. So I'm not going to guess or apply someone else's experience to your circumstances today. I highly recommend if you are considering returning to work, if you are receiving any of these other benefits, a benefits counselor can review the programs that you do receive and explain how work may affect them in that moment. Work incentives, planning and assistance programs, often called WIPAs, provide free benefit counseling to eligible Social Security disability beneficiaries who are working or actively preparing for work. So while you're speaking to them, don't only ask, well, what happens when I start working? Really ask about your hours. What happens if your hours reduce? They need to stop if they increase your hours or discover, that maybe the plan isn't sustainable. Then what does that look like? So those possibilities are a part of responsible planning when you are talking about going back to work and you deserve the accurate information. So it is certainly the counselor's role to help you understand, the rules and the guidelines regarding these different benefits before you can make a decision. So here are some different organizations that can assist you throughout your reentry. Um, if the question is about workplace accommodations, Jan, the Job Accommodation Network is a strong place to begin. The Job Accommodation Network provides free confidential guidance. You can contact Jan before speaking with any employer. They're great. I've had to call them several times just to pick their brain, and they're so kind. So you can just explain the task, the barrier, what kind of accommodation ideas would be worth considering. They're so knowledgeable there. If the question is about assistive technology, I did this on my Google search, guys. WATAP. I'm in South Carolina here. If there's an acronym or if I'm saying WATAP or they say WATAP, there we go. So it serves Washington residents with disabilities, families, employers, and providers. The program offers information demonstrations, technical assistance, and device lending library so you can explore their useful tools. And then there's the Northwest ADA Center, and they provide free information and technical assistance with the Disabilities Act in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and I believe Alaska. So that's a really good place to look for kind of general rights and responsibilities and help you identify resources. And for volunteer matching, we had touched on Idealist. They're incredible. And then your local volunteer centers to maybe explore different low pressure roles. So community participation can also begin with familiar public spaces, whether that's support groups, your local community center, and even libraries. Libraries are a really great place to start for activities or classes in quiet spaces. And then also a way to reconnect with other individuals around shared interests. So that could look like crocheting or knitting or um, Dungeons and Dragons is one that I've seen. So there's a lot of really cool different programs that they do offer, and they're rather diverse and impressive. So always check out your library. So the people around you may offer expertise and information, observation, or help. And it may feel extremely overwhelming when you are looking at this map. And you may not need all of these people, you just may need one. You may be very independent and you maybe don't have a lot of providers in your circle, and that's absolutely okay. This is going to look different for everyone. So the team can be small and it can change as the questions change and as your needs change. It's certainly unique to you. The people closest to daily life may include family, friends, peers, support group, counselors, different vocational counselors. The function and the strategy group includes occupational therapy, speech language pathology. Say an OT may look at how life tasks completed and how routines or environmental changes can support your participation, while a speech language pathologist may work on, my mind is slipping, cognitive communication, needs, attention, organization, memory strategies. I can't speak enough for speech language pathologists. They're wonderful. Neuropsychologists may help clarify patterns of cognitive strengths and difficulties. And then, of course, you have your treating provider who can oversee kind of all of these different referrals and connections that you have and address any medical restrictions or symptom management, referrals or documentation. So again, not everyone needs every person in this big web here. You remain at the center. The purpose of the support web is to make the plan workable for you while your goals, your preferences, and your decisions continue to guide it. So here we are. Here's just a recap of what we've discussed. You may not need to work on all 5 areas. You may be somewhere along this line, you may be well past it. It's certainly going to look different for everyone. The map is just useful because it helps you find the next question instead of turning the entire experience into judgment about whether you're capable or not. So again, you don't need to complete everything on the line. The useful next step could be exploring one role. You could change one part of your task. You can help prepare one sentence for a conversation, whether that's with a loved one about helping you advocate or stepping back or forward or whatever that looks like for you. Setting a limit around recovery time or contacting someone, maybe one of the individuals that we spoke about, just for additional support. And this might mean asking your provider a more specific question. So it's always helpful. These slides will be disseminated to you. But if you're needing that framework to speak to your provider, to really think about, okay, what is it that I'm needing? How can I articulate this in a clear way to express what I'm needing to get the appropriate referral at that time? That or you can call Jan or speak with a benefits counselor, look at one of the volunteers' opportunities, or write down the early sign that tells you it's time for a break. It's all going to be dependent upon where you're at. And if you're not sure where to begin, Brain Northwest can help you sort through any question or identify the appropriate resources as needed. So, please absolutely do continue to use Brain Northwest as a trusted resource. And as we close, I just want to return the idea that reentry is not one decision made at once. It is a process of learning what fits and noticing where the barriers are, the tools, choosing what to communicate, and then following a pace that you can live alongside. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Reggie's gonna stop recording here shortly, and then you guys will have the floor to ask any questions or share any comments that you have. But I thank you so much for being here today.